Happy Tuesday night, everybody. It's me, Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on the podcast. We promised you we'd be back here on Tuesday evening, and here we are. We're men of our word. We're oath keepers, promise keepers. Andrew, before we dive into what was an extremely busy last couple of days for the recruiting world, you're close to closing on your house. Are you getting nervous yet? Have you found any major problems? Are there huge spiders in the attic?
No spiders. Inspection went well. Yeah, we're supposed to be closing tomorrow. So tomorrow afternoon, I got to drive down there. But yeah, everything is on track. It's actually been an easier process than I thought it would. Lots of e-signatures, but we're getting there.
Are you ready to be an official Daytonian?
Yes, I am. I am ready to get out of the thriving metropolis of Auglaize County and head down that direction. Yes.
Auglaize County is the best name for a county in the state of Ohio. However, it's just, I don't know exactly what it invokes, but evokes, but it makes me think of just Little House on the Prairie, like Patrick Ingalls or Jonathan Ingalls, or who is the Ingalls?
I don't know.
Laura Ingalls Wilder. That's who.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I got him. We're good. We're really good at making references to other things. We should probably just talk about recruiting. 3 new commitments for Ohio State in the last 4 days. Started on Friday with the decision of Bod Penn Miller, Ontario High School, Mansfield, Ohio, 6'4", 185-pound receiver. Did not take long, as we thought maybe it wouldn't when we mentioned the offer to him last week on this show. There was some discussion between Bod Penn and his family about maybe still taking the trip to Boston College just to be men of their word. What it came down to, really, when he made the decision, he told Ohio State on Thursday, it was that he doesn't just want to be a man of his word. He wants to be a man of doing the right thing. And he knew he wasn't going to be going to Boston College at that point, and there was no point in wasting their time, money, or resources in having himself make that trip to Boston just for the fun of it. So, it's a decision, and we'll see this as we talk a little bit more about Jake Cook's decision as well. But I don't think it's something that people are going to celebrate maybe the way that they should. And I understand it. I mean, this is a guy who I don't even know what he's ranked nationally. I don't think I even looked it up. When I wrote the story about him committing, I don't even think we considered it. It doesn't matter ultimately where he's ranked. Put on the huddle tape. Understand that he's playing in a pretty small ball in Ohio. But when you look at him and the burst that he has and the athleticism he has and the size he has, this is an opportunity for Brian Hartline. Everyone thinks Brian Hartline is the best receivers coach in the country, and I think that's fair. Because he's been able to do that with guys like Marvin Harrison, but he's also done it with guys like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and everything in between. This is the first project that Brian Hartline has ever taken on. And I think that for him, it actually probably excites him in some way to have an opportunity to completely mold someone from scratch, which it's a cool thing to be able to do. But yeah, put on the tape of Bod Penn Miller. He's really, really good. He did a nice interview with us for Birminology last week ahead of time, and it's plenty to like about him and the situation. I asked Ryan Day before. I think I might have talked about this last week, but I think it still matters a lot when you have these types of stories, and maybe more than it ever has, because the world and the way that Ohio State is going to have to adjust itself. Not only because most years, I think moving forward, you're going to see Ohio State sign 25 or more guys moving forward, because it's just what you have to do. Knowing how many guys are going to transfer, and knowing that with the free transfers and NIL and guys, basically putting themselves into new NIL deals every single year, there's going to be a lot more turnover moving forward, I think, than we've seen lately. This offseason, notwithstanding, because Ohio State has such a special roster returning, that I think a lot of guys believe that, hey, we could just win a national championship. Let's not scatter. But I think in the future, you're going to see that a lot. And that's why guys like Bod Penn Miller are so important. He's in it for the long haul. He wants the development. This is not a kid who's going to transfer in a year or two if he doesn't play. He realizes he's a very raw, very moldable clay. And Andrew, have you watched the film? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I've watched the film. The athleticism is off the charts there, and I know you've got to actually see him at camp, so you got to kind of see that up close and personal. I just, like you said, I'm interested to see kind of where a high school quarterback from little old Ontario high school in Ohio, like what he looks like in 3 years, 4 years after Brian Hartline kind of gets his hands on him, because I was kind of hoping maybe this fall you might be able to see him play in wide receiver a little bit, but it just sounds like it's one of those situations where you're the best player on a small school, so you're going to play the most important position on the field. But I'm with you on loving these stories, whether it's Darren Lee or Terry McLaurin, obviously not from Ohio, but just the area. I love seeing these stories, and he seems like a great kid, and I'm excited to kind of see what he can do over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, maybe it's a small sample size, but like when you think about some of those names that have had those really cool camp stories, Darren Lee is certainly one. Denzel Ward is another. Obviously, Terry McLaurin is one we hearken to all the time. Like, they've generally worked out. Those kids are guys that they play with a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove. And Bodpen, aside from the fact that, like, you know, he came to the United States as a 6-year-old from Ethiopia and couldn't speak English, and here he is 10 years later with opportunities to go to Harvard. Like, it's a really hardworking kid. I don't see him as the type of kid that's going to slack on, oh, now I'm going to Ohio State, I can do whatever I want. Like, he is special. And Mark Porter from Scouting Ohio, listened to him a couple times. It's mentioned that he thinks that Bodpen looks like Lamar Jackson at quarterback. And I think that's just because he's 6'3" and wears number 8 and runs pretty fast. But you know, he has an opportunity to be really special with the football in his hands. And I'm thinking about, you know, down the road, the trick plays you can do with people like that, because I like trick plays. Trick plays are fun for me. I like them. I hope that there's a lot more trick plays in the NCAA football game coming out, but I don't think there will be.
Yeah, we don't see enough of those these days. Like the whole Boise State Oklahoma game, that was like one of the best things I've ever seen. And now those happenings are few and far between. So it's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, college football sucks now. Jake Cook committed on Sunday. That one was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, for anybody who saw him on the podcast daily with me and Bill Landis on Monday or on Friday, like, that seemed like a pretty much a done deal right away. He got the offer the previous Saturday. He did not delay. He told Justin Fry immediately when he got the offer that he was coming to Ohio State, as Jake and I recorded our commitment episode of Birminology on the following Monday. So 2 days after that, that one was sitting in the bank for a while. The way that he did it, you know, he wanted to get through his official visit. He wanted to tell everyone in person. He wanted to make the announcement at Ohio State's recruit dinner on Friday night, which he was able to do. Spent his weekend going to the Zach Bryan concert at Ohio Stadium on Saturday with some of the guys. And like, it's again, the story is really cool, but for Jake Cook now, like the spotlight is on him. Obviously, this is a kid that for the last 3 years, most people in Ohio did not think was good enough to play for Ohio State. He's lost a lot of weight. He looks great. Now he's got to maintain that. So he is worked extremely hard to be where he is. And I know that Jake is going to continue that. And so he's the center in the class. So when we look at the July 4th announcement from Andrew Stargell, we'll talk about other upcoming decisions for guys soon. I think that it would be fair, even with like Micah DeBose committing to Alabama over the weekend, which was a shock to a lot of people. Ohio State thought that they were in a good position there, and he committed to Alabama before he even started his official visit there over the weekend, which was unexpected. But it goes to show how crazy recruiting can be sometimes. I don't think Stargell ends up at Ohio State as a second guy. I don't think that this is a plan where, you know, you take him and you say, well, maybe Cook can play guard, whatever. The plan is for Jake Cook to be a center, and Ohio State will have to figure out what they're going to do with the rest of the offensive line recruiting as we go. And we'll talk about David Sanders and some of those moving parts as this episode of Talking Stuff moves along. But Jake Cook is the center. I think that all but eliminates Andrew Stargell from Ohio State on July 4th. So there's that. And then, I mean, those two commitments were fairly expected. We knew about Bodpen Miller coming. We knew about Jake Cook coming. We knew that Zion Grady, the 4-star defensive end from Enterprise, Alabama, after he made his first visit to Ohio State in May, he told pretty much anyone who would listen that it was his best visit, that he'd never experienced anything like that before. And he committed to Ryan Day on Sunday morning in Columbus before he left his official visit, went home, got his ducks in a row, announced on Monday morning that he was in the class, picks Ohio State over Florida State, Miami, Tennessee, Auburn. And ultimately, Andrew, like, this is one you did not believe me when I told you on Sunday he committed. Do you feel bad that you don't ever actually believe anything I say and you wait till you read it from other people in order to believe it?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I shouldn't have doubted you, but I mean, yeah, there's been a lot of positive comments from him over the last handful of weeks or whatever, but it just kind of seemed like every time he visited somewhere, whether it was Florida State or Miami or wherever, there was a lot of positive buzz coming out of those visits, which, that's normal. We say it all the time. It's very rarely does an official visit go poorly. And I just kind of thought maybe this was
it's not never. We'll talk about that later.
That's a good point. But I kind of thought once we get to Tuesday or Wednesday, I certainly didn't expect him to commit on Monday or whatever, but I thought we'd get to Tuesday or Wednesday and maybe the buzz would kind of have toned down a little bit. And now we sit here Tuesday evening and he's committed to Ohio State. So I was caught off guard by that. I'm not going to lie. That one caught me off guard, and I should maybe listen to you a little bit more often.
Yeah, probably. Zion Grady, 6'4", 225 pounds. He's much more of that true defensive end type that Ohio State has been seeking in the last couple of cycles that they have fallen short for. He is a guy that at his size, with his athleticism and length, he is the number 79 overall player in the On3 industry rankings, number 11 ranked defensive end. And that's because On3 has him actually as the 22nd ranked edge player in the country. So they're the outlier. Rivals has him as the number 3 ranked edge. ESPN has him as number 7. ESPN doesn't count. They don't matter. 247 has number 10. So, I mean, I think you're looking at a player that's anywhere in the top 150 players in the country. That's always a huge win. It's also a big win because he is obviously from Alabama. Ohio State, if I'm recalling correctly, last signed a player from Alabama in 1981. They're on track now to sign 2 in this class, which is pretty crazy. And there are 2 more guys from the state of Alabama that we are going to have to continue to monitor as things move forward. So, I thought maybe that Ohio State could capitalize in the state of Alabama after Nick Saban retired, and wondering if Kalen DeBoer was going to have some struggles, but like Alabama's killing it on the recruiting trail. So that they're not struggling, but yet Ohio State's still been able to make a little bit of inroads there. And to be honest, they were not really that involved in the Zion Grady recruitment for whatever reason. He had been previously committed to Alabama and decommitted when Nick Saban retired and never really looked back. So he's committed to Ohio State now. He is interesting because when you combine him with London Merritt, who is more of that, I don't even know how to describe London Merritt. He's like a Jonathan Cooper type defensive end, 6'3.5", 240 pounds. And then you have Zaire Mathis, who visited Penn State this past weekend on an official visit. He's going to take his official visit to Ohio State in the fall. It does set up some interesting conversations. And I don't want to move. I think it's probably likely we now have to move Damian Shanklin down the list of doesn't seem realistic for Ohio State. That looks like it's going to be Tennessee or LSU. We'll see if someone else gets involved there, but I think that it's likely he doesn't end up in Columbus. And now, as far as edge rushers go, there's Justin Hill. That's pretty much it. And that's what the Buckeyes are waiting on at that spot. The decision from Zion Grady does not impact Justin Hill at all, despite the fact that people will certainly try to spin it that way in Tuscaloosa, for example. But it is not related. Justin Hill is a different player for Ohio State and he is fully aware of what their intentions are and what they were doing before Zion Grady committed.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big class for Larry Johnson. Obviously, last cycle they signed Edric Houston, but they missed on so many guys, Dylan Stewart, those types of guys. So I think the talk of him losing his fastball or whatever you want to call it was probably a little bit over exaggerated. So I mean, nice bounce back for him for sure. And there's still 1 or 2 pieces left, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, from there, those are the 3 new commitments for Ohio State. That brings them up to 19 on the cycle. They are the number 1 ranked class in the country, according to all 3 of the major recruiting services. I feel, again, pretty confident that this class is going to end up in the 27 or 28 range. So it seems like from here, the majority of the focus is going to be on filling out the defensive and offensive lines. We'll talk more about that as we go. And we'll dive into just trying to recap this weekend's official visitors, starting, the guys that were in town that are committed: Tavian St. Clair, Nate Roberts, Devin Sanchez, Naeem Offord. No problems. I mean, there was obviously some concerns about Naeem Offord heading into this trip because he had spent 17 days in the last week at Alabama, but there is nothing that Ohio State feels is a concern. Naeem Offord was extremely aggressive in helping try to recruit Dorian Brew this weekend. Like the family says and does all the right things when they're dealing with Ohio State. And as we head into July in this recruiting dead period, there is no concern. Now, does that mean that there won't be any concern moving forward? Of course, that doesn't mean that, because it's 2024 in recruiting. There's going to be like a 3-day window at the end of July where kids are going to get around the country and make 1 or 2 visits at the barbecues or whatever. I would be pretty surprised if Naeem Offord doesn't end up somewhere that weekend, because that's just the way it's going to go. He's close to Auburn. He's close to Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up popping in for some mac and cheese at one of those places. But I don't think that it's something that people should ultimately worry about until like November. How do you feel coming off the weekend?
No, that sounds right. I think that his recruitment is kind of going exactly how we expected it to go. And if it's not how we expected it to go, it's how we should have expected it to go. Because I don't think he ever once said, hey, I'm done, not visiting anywhere. So I'm sure he'll be back in Tuscaloosa a half dozen times between now and December. And, he's not far from there. So, but yeah, I mean, just based on the photos and the comments and all that stuff that I've seen, I am nowhere close to panic mode or anything on that one. So I feel like Ohio State's well positioned there, as well positioned as they could be right now.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes back to Tuscaloosa 6 more times, then that's probably an issue. If he does it once or twice, I'm not going to be surprised. I do think it's encouraging, especially if you're on the social medias. If you saw, like on Twitter over the weekend, Naeem Offord's family, his father, like very, very laudatory when it comes to talking about Tim Walton. And it's something that maybe gets taken for granted all the time, that families are always in support of what their children are doing. But it seems like the family is very much in line with keeping that commitment solid. Obviously, Tavian St. Clair, Nate Roberts. Robert spent most of the weekend hanging out with Brody Lennon, the Gilmore Academy tight end from Cleveland. Those guys were also at the Zach Bryan concert and the Buckeye Country Fest, so which was the highlight of the weekend, according to Nate Roberts. Really, Roberts and Brody Lennon, the idea for the weekend was just to make sure they hang out and make sure that they like each other and that they're going to be comfortable playing alongside one another for the next couple of years. Lennon made his official visit to Kentucky the week before. I said on last week's show that I thought he would be committed by the time we recorded this week's show, or maybe something like that. I don't remember exactly what I said. Something along those lines. No public announcement has been made yet, so I guess we're still waiting to see if something changes, but I would be shocked if he ends up at Kentucky or Wisconsin. Ohio State certainly feels like they did what they needed to do there. Offensive line in town, David Sanders, pretty big. I don't know that I can say much more about David Sanders than I said last week. Like, you have to get him. If you don't get David Sanders, then this class, no matter how good the rest of it is going to have a giant gaping black widow, brown recluse size hole in the flesh of it. So the Buckeyes did everything that they needed to do. They feel very good about where things are. As I wrote about on Sunday at ohiostate.rivals.com, like, there is a belief that they are the favorite. But Andrew, that doesn't matter, right? Because he's not making an announcement until middle of August.
Yeah, that's the only thing you really got to worry about now. I mean, of course, you're going to worry about Tennessee all the way up until he signs that dotted line, or at least until he makes a commitment. But it's just a matter of, can Justin Fry and Ryan Day kind of maintain where they're at now for the next month and a half, or whenever he decides. I think last I saw, it just wanted to be before his senior season starts. So August would make sense there. Like we talked about last week, I wonder, and I know we're heading into a dead period, just what kind of, does the family make any trips between now and that assumed timeline of mid-August? And if he is going to make some trips, it's probably, well, we've talked about the travel thing. I guess, you can get to Columbus relatively quickly from there too. But I don't know, what kind of visits do they make over the next month and a half or whatever? Are there any, or are they truly just shutting it down and kind of weighing the pros and cons of each school?
Well, that was the intention. That's what the message was from the Sanders family when they left Columbus, which was, We're going to go home. We're going to shut off phones. We're going to just dial in and get ready for senior season, try to do some family stuff that doesn't involve recruiting. And again, yes, there is that weekend at the end of July, which is going to be instrumental. And I'm not going to say he's going to end up at Tennessee that weekend or end up at Ohio State. He's just as likely to go to Clemson that weekend or Georgia or what, any of the other schools that he's still considering. But by all accounts, this seems like Ohio State and Tennessee are at the top, and that Clemson and Georgia are on the outside looking in. That, like, it doesn't make anybody feel better when I say it, but like, that's as good as you can be right now. Like, there is no, he's not, his family was never going to get home, or they were never going to commit somewhere on the spot. That was never their plan. And they have done everything that they said that they would do plan wise as a family. So like, until something happens that you're like, oh, that's a surprise, like we didn't expect that, then I would be worried. But they have been extremely true to their word throughout the entire process. He's visited Ohio State 3 times in the last 3 months. The Buckeyes are right there. You just have to push it over the goal line. That's it. And this would be a good time for everyone to find the 1870 Society website or the foundation's website. And if you're feeling like, you don't want to travel anywhere yourself this summer, and you just have a little extra cash laying around, and you just want to provide a little bit of scratch to help the efforts, go ahead. If this all things are equal is a fun saying, but all things are not equal. The number that I've heard it being bandied about is what Tennessee has offered is fairly substantial. And Ohio State is going to have to figure out a way to at least make it competitive. I've got plenty of assurances that they will do whatever it takes to do that. But sometimes it's about putting your money where your mouth is, right?
Yeah. Put your money where your mouth is. But yeah, just kind of wrapping that one up. Last week we talked, I think I said I was hoping to see like some crystal balls or whatever coming out of the official visit weekend. And I probably shouldn't have said that, because he's just not, he doesn't seem like somebody that handles things that way to where he's like dropping hints to the media or anything like that. I think there's maybe like one pick submitted on all the major sites, and it's to Clemson, I want to say. And I believe that's an old pick. So
certainly not a new pick.
Yeah, definitely not a new pick. So I don't know. I just feel like Ohio State, Tennessee coaching staffs, also Georgia and Clemson, are just going to kind of be on pins and needles doing what they can between now and middle of August or whenever that announcement comes.
Yeah, they've done everything they could do. Ohio State's right there at the top. Now you just got to find a way to close it out. Jake Cook was the other offensive line visitor. Those two spent a lot of time together. Carter Lowe made it down to Columbus for Saturday to hang out. The Buckeyes are doing everything they can. On defense, that sort of things get interesting. Obviously, Zion Grady was one of the uncommitted players when he made the visit this weekend, commits to the Buckeyes on Monday. One of his close friends and another Alabama prospect, Malik Autry, the Auburn commit, was in town with him. Another player committed to Alabama, Jaden Harmon, was in town, the linebacker from Rome, Georgia. After talking to people on Sunday, the initial response I got was Malik Autry loves Ohio State, but man, this is going to be super hard. We don't think it's something we can pull off. But no one was like saying, okay, we're done, we're not going to try. But talking to Malik Autry, and I talked to him over the last couple of days, like, the kid really does seem genuinely interested in Ohio State. He said he wants to return for at least one game this year, maybe 2. I thought the most interesting thing, and we can read into it whatever we want. I personally am not going to choose to read too much into it, because I think sometimes kids, especially when they are, Auburn's a great program, don't get me wrong, but when you're committed to a program like Auburn and then Ohio State's involved, like, you get excited and you talk to media and you say things. So I'm trying not to put too much weight into his response in the way that he's been talking about the Ohio State visit. But Bill Kurelic from 247 Sports had a quote from him saying that he would make a decision in the next week or so. And he's already been committed to Auburn for like 2 years. So I don't know what decision you make, especially when you say for sure you're going to make visits for a game in the fall. So I would be shocked if he pulled a flip in the near future, but that comment, like, I don't think you can just dismiss it entirely, right?
Yeah, you can't dismiss it entirely, but if you're an Ohio State fan getting extremely optimistic about this, then you're maybe getting your hopes up a bit too high. I think if he were to flip to Ohio State, that would be one of the more surprising recruiting developments that we've seen since Ryan Day took over.
Yeah.
I think of like the Justin Scott commitment last summer or whatever that obviously did not turn out well for Ohio State, but just something that kind of surprises you immensely. And that's how I would feel about that one. I think the kid, practically lives at Auburn. I believe his entire family is roots for Auburn, but
I think he's got family members in the faculty at Auburn as well. Like it runs very deep, his Tiger ties. And I'm going to say this, and I know everyone wants like instant feedback and you want, there's no patience. I actually think if he were to flip to Ohio State now, that'd be worse than if he flipped to Ohio State in November. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I think if this is a recruitment that needs to go the distance for Ohio State to win it, and I think if something were to happen where he reopened things, now, unless he reopened things and said, I'm completely shutting things down, I'm never talking to anybody else, changes his phone number, moves, whatever, but that's not likely to happen. So to me, this is not something where you actually want him to commit right now or flip right now, because that just gives Auburn 6 months of fundraising that otherwise maybe is used elsewhere. And I know Ohio State's not, they're certainly not going to tell Malik Autry, oh, actually, Malik, don't do that right now, if he was interested in doing it. But I do think that there's a touch of gamesmanship being used here. I think there's a touch of a kid being really excited by a place that he's never seen. I mean, again, growing up 20 minutes from Auburn, if you look at the recruiting websites, they all track how many visits kids have made. I think there's like 30 visits to Auburn. Like, it's not, this would be like, I've been trying to think of the way to like post this. Like, this would be like Jack Sawyer flipping from Ohio State. Like that would have been a kid who committed 2 years ahead of time, lives 20 minutes away, visited 100 times, ending up in Jack Sawyer deciding to go to Alabama. Like that's what we're talking about here. So I would not be optimistic, but I do think that there's like a door open here for Ohio State. Now, how long it takes for it to be completely opened or for him to walk through it, we'll see. The relationship with Zion Grady is very important. They are not, and certainly have never considered themselves a package deal, but Zion Grady helps without question.
Yeah, I was just going to say he's tight with Zion Grady. Maybe Grady and maybe Naheem Offord to a lesser degree can give him a bit of a shove to. He genuinely seems interested in Ohio State, and it seems like there's actually a slight chance that this could happen. But still, you have to temper expectations a bit if you're a fan of Ohio State, obviously.
Yeah, I'm not in the percentages or anything like that generally, but I mean, Ohio State's in this fight. He told me directly, Ohio State is in the fight. Ohio State is in it. So what that means, we'll see. The Buckeyes are pretty focused right now at defensive tackle on Malik Autry, on seeing what happens with Jakeem Stewart, and then adding someone, whether it's Maxwell Roy, whether it's Trajan Odom, whether it's anyone else at defensive tackle. They'd like to get one of those guys in and then really push all the chips into the middle for Autry or Stewart, or maybe both.
Autry is unlike those other guys. And I think, Jakeem Stewart's a freak, assuming he reclassifies, but that size, those are just like we said last week. Those are the kind of guys you don't find around here very often. So,
right. Autry's the true one tech, which you don't have a lot of in the North. And, as we watched, as Isaiah Gibson, who took his official visit to Ohio State last week, he's already committed to Georgia. Those guys are the difference maker when it comes to the playoffs. And you have to find, like, this is not meant to be a knock on Auburn or Hugh Freeze, but if you look at the next couple of years, it's sure feels more likely to me that Ohio State's going to be in the playoff every year than Auburn. So what is important to you? And that's something that, Autry has said, like, yes, it will be hard for him to flip from Auburn, but he has to think about what is going to get him where he wants to be. And when you're a 6'6", 320-pound defensive tackle, like with elite athleticism, you're going to find your way to the NFL no matter what. But are you going to find your way to the NFL with the full support that Ohio State can provide, with the coaching from Larry Johnson, et cetera? Like, those are the things that I think have opened his eyes. And I don't know that the Auburn people are sleeping comfortably, like knowing Ohio State is really there, because this is Ohio State or Auburn. There's nothing else. So Jaden Harmon, I think we'll talk about him a little bit here, and then Dorian Brew. Harmon, from talking to people around the Buckeyes program, they were actually a little surprised that the Alabama commit seemed as receptive to their recruitment as he was. There's going to be, this is a process. I mean, he's been to Ohio State once before, but I would not be counting him as a potential flip candidate right now. But if Alabama goes out and struggles this year, and I'm not sure that that's a realistic expectation or not, but if they go out and lose 3-4 games, or the defense looks disheveled or not a place, and Kalen DeBoer doesn't seem to have a real firm grasp on the program, then he's a guy to really pay attention to in October, not really right now. Dorian Brew, though, that's one that seems like it's just gone all over the place in the last couple of weeks, even more so than it did in the last few months, right?
Yeah, it seems like every other team, anybody that covers any team besides Ohio State feels like Ohio State is 3rd, 4th, or 5th on the list, it seems. And I've still seen comments of saying as much even after the official visit, which is weird to me. We saw the photos of him and Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord with Tim Walton, which were some pretty cool photos. But there's cool photos anytime you go on a visit somewhere. So do those mean anything? Who knows? No. Right. Exactly. But yeah, I don't know. You talked about it, I think, on the daily, just about, is there a desire to be the, no doubt about it, number one corner in a class like USC's or maybe Oregon or wherever? Or can you accept the fact that because you're the 3rd cornerback to commit for a class, it doesn't mean that you're being viewed as the CB3, if that makes sense?
Yeah, you're not locked into being behind those guys. This is the argument that Ohio State's trying to make. Number one, there is an NIL component here as well, where Texas, USC are certainly being more aggressive than Ohio State when it comes to Dorian Brew, and that is what it is. I mean, those teams are going to go over the top. Ohio State loves Dorian Brew. They value him and his family very highly, but they're also understanding that they're in a different position. The reality here for Dorian Brew is that you're 6'2", you're 185 pounds, you're running a 4.4, you're a freak athlete. There is literally nothing you can't do athletically, but you've only played cornerback for a year. So you are right now probably developmentally behind Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord, who happen to be ranked as the top 2 cornerbacks in the country. There's nothing that Ohio State can do about that. But that doesn't mean that you're stuck behind them for the rest of your career. You can go in and dominate and put in the work and still be out of Ohio State in 3 years. If we look at Marshawn Lattimore, he played 1 year really at Ohio State. If you look at Malik Hooker, it's 1 year at Ohio State. You don't need 3 years of being on the field. And so Dorian Brew, one of the things I've heard is that he's really looking for early playing time. Aaron Scott was really looking for early playing time a year ago. And then he got to Ohio State and realized, I'm not ready for early playing time in the Big Ten. I thought I was, and he wasn't. And it is a realization that hits you not until you get to college. And when it hits you, if you're in Los Angeles and without family and you're that's not where you want to be, for example, is that stretch from February to the following June is going to be real hard. And that moment is going to hit you when you realize, I'm actually not as ready as I thought I was. It's not to say that he shouldn't be confident. It's not to say that shouldn't be his goal to play. Everyone's goal should be to play early. But if you're not being realistic with yourself, or if you're overvaluing or overstating your position, because you are trying to raise your NIL capital or your NIL stake, that's the goal and the job for Ohio State, for Tim Walton, for Ryan Day, for the rest of the coaching staff, is to be honest with these kids and tell them, this is where you actually are. This is how we see you. We love you. We want you here. I truly believe that Dorian Brew wants to commit to Ohio State. I firmly believe that. And I don't know that there's any way to prove it. That's what it is. Heading into this evening, so it's Tuesday night, I think we're probably 72 hours away from a decision for him. And as of Monday, talking to a number of people, that has not been made yet. I still think that there's going to be some back and forth in this battle, but it's Ohio State, it's USC, it's Texas, with Oregon and LSU on the outside looking in. And I think that there's a case to be made for all three of those schools. But I truly believe that Dorian Brew, in his heart, wants to go to Ohio State. And I think at least his mother probably would prefer he's at Ohio State because I think she would like to be back in Ohio as well. So we'll see. Again, I don't want to speak for other people. There's obviously a lot of moving parts, but this one is not over. I've seen some back and forth in the last 48 hours about Ohio State or USC or Texas. Like the Texas folks who we talked about last week, like they don't seem to think Ohio State's even a threat. USC at least is cognizant of Ohio State and aware that they exist. But the Buckeyes feel like there is a point that they are comfortable with where things are with Dorian Brew, and they feel like they've laid it all out. And I think they go back to the point where in January he had committed to them privately and was going to announce. So that feeling is still there. Like he still loves Ohio State.
You mentioned it that he hasn't played cornerback for as long as some of these guys, still relatively new to the position. Do you get the feeling, or has anybody told you, is he like open? I think he can play anywhere in the secondary. And we've talked about safety a bit. Does he like have an exact preference, or does he absolutely want to be shut down corner? Or is it kind of one of those things where I just want to play a defense somewhere in the secondary?
No, I mean, the primary reason that Ohio State fell back a little bit for him was because of the coaching changes, but because he wants to play corner, and Ohio State was not sure that they would have the room. Blake Woodby was committed. Naeem Offord had been telling people privately that he was intending to commit to Ohio State, and so that changed things a little bit. It really comes down to confidence and, again, what you said, like just because you're the third to commit, that doesn't mean you're the third cornerback. Like that is the internal debate that him and his family are going to have. Obviously, Texas, USC, everyone else is going to say, yes, you are the third cornerback. Look how good those guys are. And like, again, I absolutely hate even the suggestion that, oh, you're not good enough to play there is a recruiting pitch. I think that's so stupid. Now I'm sure they're not telling him that directly, but like when you tell him those guys are better than you, you're not going to play in front of them. Like, I don't know how else you take that. But again, I'm not the one with a 17-year-old kid who's being recruited by all these major colleges. So my opinion is somewhat irrelevant.
But long story short, you think we could have an answer here by the end of the week ish?
Yeah, I would think probably by Friday this is wrapped up one way or another. And then, unfortunately for Ohio State, this bleeds over because Brandon Finney, the cornerback from Maryland, who they hosted for an official visit a week ago. As we record this right now, it's 7:35 on Tuesday night. Finney is committing on Tuesday at some point. It might already be done. I haven't checked Twitter. Let's go to the old Twitter machine and see if he's committed to Penn State yet, because I think that's what's coming. And if it does, it does. But it looks like no, he committed to Oregon.
Wow.
So that's actually that probably. I mean, he visited Oregon over the weekend, and big win for them. So Ohio State liked Brandon Finney, but they were not really able to go all in there, knowing that they were waiting for Dorian Brew's decision. So as you move forward, I don't think at this point, and Tim Walton will always have backup plans. That's what good coaches do. But I don't think Ohio State has a real sense of who they would move on to if Dorian Brew ends up at USC or Texas. But right now, I mean, it feels like it's too close to call. But for years how we would talk about recruiting and we'd say head versus heart. Now it's like head versus heart versus pocket, and all those things are conflating and conflicting with one another here. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But again, the Buckeyes are comfortable with where they are. They feel like they've presented themselves in the right way, and they believe that he will make the right choice. We'll see if that ends up being Ohio State. One player that will not end up at Ohio State, even though, I said last week, I thought if Jordan Davison made the official visit to Ohio State, it was a good sign that he was going to be a Buckeye. I think when he arrived, that was still the intention. I think even probably as Sunday, I think that was probably still the intention. That is not going to happen. Ohio State will not be the landing spot for Jordan Davison. At this point, it could be Oregon. It could be Michigan. It could potentially still be Alabama, although I think Alabama is on the verge of flipping a Kylan Deere from Ole Miss. So that would be a big win for them that I think would eliminate them they would remove themselves from the Jordan Davison debate. Bottom line here is simple. When you are a highly recruited player, you have expectations on you. And I don't think Ohio State was comfortable with everything that they had seen in the last year. And I don't need to say much more than that. The bottom line is they've recruited Jordan Davison very hard for a long time, and he's not going to end up at Ohio State, but the Buckeyes are fine with it. There are other running back options that they're looking at and have continued to look at since Carlos Loughlin took over. Of those guys, we talked about like the first day that Carlos Loughlin was at Ohio State, he offered Shakai Mills-Knight from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I think if they add another like bigger back, he's definitely the guy to watch for in my mind. And if they look at maybe a more versatile player or more of a scat back type, then you could see that being Anthony Rogers, the Alabama commit from Alabama. So those are the two that I would look for the most. But it also brings me to a different point. Bottom line, again, Jordan Davison will not end up at Ohio State, so we can remove that conversation. After watching Pickerington North last week at 7-on-7 at Ohio State, I think that there's actually a shot that Preston Bowman could end up at Ohio State in that versatile role, that hybrid role where he played a lot out of the backfield, and I think you could see him be that type of guy. The Xavier Johnson type is what he's been described as to me. That 6 foot tall, can do a lot of things. Ohio State offered him on Sunday. He committed to Kentucky on Saturday. Brian Hartline was not actually the one that offered him. It was Ryan Day who did, which is interesting. And with Bowman, this is not going to be like an immediate flip. If Ohio State would have offered him last Wednesday, he would probably have committed to Ohio State on the spot. But he's had a really good relationship with Vince Marrow and with Kentucky. This is going to be a process. Ohio State's going to have to prove to him and show him exactly where they believe he can fit in. This is a player that they had offered a preferred walk-on spot to in March. And maybe Preston was, waiting to see if that could turn into something else. It did, but a little bit too late. But there's 6 months until signing day, and I would imagine that we'll see him on campus with the Buckeyes a few times, and we'll see where it goes. Now, the natural inclination and natural question people are going to ask is, they offered another receiver. They just landed a commitment from Bodkin Miller. The week before, it was Quincy Porter. You've got Desi Jones, Porter, and Miller committed. What does it mean for DeCorian Moore? What does it mean for Vernell Brown? What does it mean for Jamie French, Phillip Bell, et cetera, Dalen McCutcheon? Those things are not related. Now, that doesn't mean that Ohio State is like feeling great about everything with those other guys, but they're not related. The decision to offer Preston Bowman again was made by Ryan Day. It had nothing to do with how, let's say the receivers coach feels about their relationship with DeCorian Moore, Vernell Brown, et cetera. But it is going to be hard to land DeCorian Moore. That's going to be very difficult. It is going to be hard to land Vernell Brown. I think Ohio State, and I'm comfortable saying this, Ohio State would take 5 receivers if it comes down to it. If it means Preston Bowman comes in the class later and they get one of those other receivers, whether it's Moore, Brown, McCutcheon, or Bell. I'm talking a lot. We're at 43 minutes in here, and I feel like we got a lot more to talk about.
No, so let me finish off the running back discussion first. Before we didn't rehearse this or anything, but I was actually going to ask you, because I know very little about Preston Bowman. I was going to ask you if there was a chance that he could be the RB3 in the class, because I'm not a running back expert, but it seems to, and again, 3 does seem like the number you need. But for me, it kind of makes sense that if you have Bo Jackson, you have Isaiah West, if you're taking a third guy, it sort of makes sense for that to be more of a, I don't want to say all purpose or scat back, but more of a versatile guy, I guess, out of the backfield. So I was thinking Preston Bowman, receiver, catches passes, kind of that Xavier Johnson that you mentioned before. Could he be somebody to fill that role? And I was going to actually ask you who offered him. So that is interesting that Ryan Day did that and not Brian Hartline. Do you have, and you've seen him at camp and stuff, correct?
Multiple times. Yes.
Yes. Do you have would Xavier Johnson kind of be the player comp, or is there
100%,
any
100%?
Is it? Okay.
I mean, that's the guy. And he's a similar person, a great kid. He's exactly what you want in your program. Ohio State loves Preston Bowman, has recruited him and got to know him over the last 4 years. I think it's really unfortunate, that he committed to Kentucky when he did, because it does make this more difficult. And you can understand it from his part. Like Kentucky has obviously believed in him. They offered him a long time ago. But like, we should also not pretend that he didn't have to go camp at Kentucky and basically like lock in the committable offer earlier this month, because he did. Like he like Jake Cook, like Bodkin Miller, like a lot of kids in Ohio, he's getting a lot better as he gets closer to being a fully formed adult. Like he is not the same player now that he was a year ago. And Ohio State has been watching very closely. Ryan Day is a big fan of his. And I think ultimately he does have the potential to be that athlete in this class that can do a lot of those different things. Now, does that mean Carlos Lockman isn't going to still try to recruit Turbo Rogers? Of course not. He's going to go after him because Ohio State's going to go after the best of the best no matter what. But the important thing with Preston Bowman is that whether it's a wide receiver, whether it's a running back, whether it's a hybrid, his offer is not like a white flag in any other recruitment. Like that's, and I know that there was immediately on Sunday when the offer happened, I was driving back from Columbus and the concert this weekend when that happened. And immediately people are, oh, well, I guess that means they're out for this guy. They're out for this guy. Like it does not mean that. Now, does it mean they're going to get those guys? No, but those things are not directly correlated. Period.
Right. But even if there are not white flags waving, and Brian Hartline, of course, is never going to be one to wave a white flag, but it definitely seems like Vernell Brown is trending towards staying in Florida, probably with the Gators where he's a legacy. Jamie French, I don't even know if it's worth talking about at this point. He doesn't even mention Ohio State anymore. And then DeCorian Moore, he's coming off an Oregon visit.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine there's any reason for optimism from the Ohio State fan base right now. I know he's got mom's blessing to go there if he wants. And obviously Brian Hartline is Brian Hartline, but just from my perspective, it does not seem like they're getting any of the big three, or call it big two if you want to just talk about Moore and Brown.
I wouldn't consider myself optimistic on either of them at this point. I don't think that it's over and done with. Vernell Brown especially, I still think that if I was like putting them in order of who I think would still pick Ohio State, I still would have Vernell Brown ahead of DeCorian Moore. And I think it's a possibility. But again, there's also Dalen McCutcheon in Texas. There's also Phillip Bell in California. Like there's other guys out there that they'll move on to. Vernell Brown and DeCorian Moore are the two that matter the most in this discussion. But yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, that's the way it goes. There is, and whether people like it or not, like probably a parallel here to the 2022 recruiting class at wide receiver, where after the 21 group where you had Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka and Jaden Ballard, and that came on the heels of the 2020 group where you had Julian Fleming and G. Scott and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like there's going to be a time when there's a dip. Like when you recruit Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and Noah Rogers, and obviously Noah's gone, but now Bryson Rogers stepping up and being a really good player for Ohio State. And then you have Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham. Like this class in 25 may lack some of the star power that we've grown accustomed to, but it doesn't mean that these are bad players. And I think that this is actually a class where Brian Hartline, and it goes back to what I said about Bob Penn Miller. I think Brian Hartline is actually enjoying the chance here to kind of experiment a little bit, because with Desi Jones, with Quincy Porter, with Bob Penn Miller, like these are different types than he has on the roster. All of them are. And I think that it actually, now, that being said, you're going to swing like hell for DeCorian Moore or Vernell Brown, because those guys are instant day one playmakers, especially on a team that's going to lose a lot of wide receiver depth over the next 2 years. So you don't want this class to end up like the 2022 class did, where you're waiting right now for Kojo Antwi to see if he can play, but he's the only one left from that group. So like that's obviously not ideal, but you are going to have to be realistic and with yourselves. And I say that myself included, like the idea that Brian Hartline is going to sign 3 of the top 4 receivers every year is just not right. Especially again, as we leap into a fully formed NIL profit sharing model, like that's just not realistic,
Yeah. And those 2025 guys also see a big scary Chris Henry Jr. lurking there behind them in 2026.
Right. The number one ranked, not just the number one ranked receiver in the country in the class of 2026 already committed, but maybe the best player in the class, because Jakeem Stewart, we think, will reclassify. And Chris Henry is very likely to be the number one overall player, just like Jeremiah Smith was. Like, it's not like, I think Brian Hartline is enjoying the freedom to recruit a little bit differently in this cycle. And I think Ohio State fans should be able and willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Speaking of benefits of the doubt, Larry Johnson has made a career, especially the last couple of years, living on the benefit of the doubt because of what he did in the first 7 or 8 years of his time at Ohio State. Here we are into year 12 for him, right? Or 11? Year 11.
11 or 12, yeah.
And, if you look back at Larry's results as a recruiter, they are hard to argue with from a productivity standpoint. The last couple of years have been a little bit hit or miss. We already talked about the addition of Zion Grady. We've got Zahir Mathis. We got London Merritt. Maxwell Roy, who we briefly mentioned as far as the defensive tackles go. There were a bunch of crystal balls sent in Ohio State's direction on Tuesday. A major shock, considering that everyone in the recruiting industry was a firm believer. He was all but a done deal to Michigan. He's coming off of an official visit to Michigan. I heard on Sunday that Ohio State was deciding pretty much that and something we talked about before, there's not a huge difference between Trajan Odom and Maxwell Roy as far as the player they are, the size, that sort of stuff. The biggest difference is that Maxwell Roy tore his ACL this spring, so you're getting maybe a little bit of a concern with the health issue, but it's also 2024 and ACLs are basically healed in 13 minutes nowadays, so it doesn't matter. And Trajan Odom, the recruitment is against USC and Oregon, who are and have been extremely aggressive when it comes to NIL, and he's a West Coast kid originally, and I think Ohio State had been back and forth between where their priority was in those two recruitments. And basically on Sunday, I was informed full speed ahead on Max Roy was the decision. And that was Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, Larry Johnson. And lo and behold, 48 hours later, there's crystal balls going in Ohio State's direction, including one from Sam Webb from the Michigan Insider on 247, which is a fairly good indicator that Michigan was told by Maxwell Roy that he had made a decision and it wasn't Michigan. So that's fun, right?
Yeah, that's pretty fun. I just kind of have long assumed that they would get one of Maxwell Roy or Trajan Odom. There was a time there when I kind of thought it was going to be Odom. Obviously, the tides have turned a bit there. And then you just basically shoot for the moon the rest of the way with Jakeem Stewart, Malik Autry. Personally, I would say Malik Autry would be number one on my list just because, like we said earlier, he's so different. But either way, get one of those guys. It seems like it's going to be Roy, and then just shoot for the stars with those other two, or maybe somebody else emerges. But
yeah, I mean, we shouldn't dismiss Marion Dye. He's in that conversation as well. The Indiana standout, but I think the goal here, as I said, you are in a position. There's Justin Hill. There's that nebulous Justin Hill, whatever is going on there. We'll find out his decision on July 3rd. The decision now is to find defensive tackles. So Jarquez Carter from Florida, who took an official visit to Ohio State a week ago, I think he's probably going to stay in the South. But again, Maxwell Roy is a player that they feel at 6'3", 275 pounds. He's a wrestler. He does track and field. He's a big athlete. He's a good player. And I'm going to say this as nicely as I can, and this is not to knock Trajan Odom or his high school program, which I admittedly don't know much about. But I will say this. If I was choosing between two players who were virtually the same player, I would pick the guy from St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia because I know what that program is about. I know what Tim Roken, the head coach there, is about. I know what development that they have from players throughout the years. So when all things are equal, if one is at St. Joe's Prep and one is at Weddington High School or wherever Trajan Odom is from, not Weddington. Where's he go?
It's North Carolina, isn't it?
Yeah, it is Weddington High School in North Carolina. See, right, I doubted myself. I was pretending to be Andrew there for a second and doubting what I said. Unbelievable. I'm not saying that they couldn't still land Trajan Odom, but it seems unlikely. It seems like they'll split the baby there. So, and then there's the Malik Autry and Jakeem Stewart, and you swing for the fences with one of those guys, knowing that Jakeem Stewart is likely to reclassify. That'll probably happen in the fall, and you just keep going. And if it comes down to it in as we get closer to November, then there's Drayden Pavey in Ohio, who the Buckeyes like, but we don't know. I think he's got a commitment date set for a couple days from now, so he'll be off the board. But I think Ohio State would be able to maybe make a call there as long as they're keeping him apprised of the situation all the way through, which seems like they have done thus far. So I like the defensive line group right now. I like it, but I definitely think you need star power in it. Zion Grady helps. Justin Hill, if he commits to Ohio State over Alabama, would certainly help because I think he's the best player in the Midwest, period. I think he's the best player in the Midwest. And I say that knowing that Tavian St. Clair is in the Midwest, but Tavian St. Clair gets a bump because he's a quarterback and people pay more attention to that. But Justin Hill to me is an absolute must get. Can't possibly not get him. What do you got something you want to say? I can tell. What is it?
No, not really. I was just going to say they've just added, they've got 3 edge guys in the class now. So you hold on to them, you add Justin Hill, then you're kind of done on the edge, correct?
Yeah, as long as you hold on to Zahir Mathis, we'll see what happens there. I mean, there was no immediate talk of a flip or anything like that after the Penn State visit. Ohio State knew he was going, and so I mean, it's not a big deal there. But yeah, I mean, then you're pretty much done at edge rusher, and then you are looking for 2, maybe 3 defensive tackles.
Yeah, that sounds right. And it sounds like they can do that in a class if it's going to get up to 27, 28, 29. So yeah.
Which is so weird. I mean, we've never covered an Ohio State class where they're talking about that and mean it. It's pretty crazy. Before we wrap up the show, we're nearing an hour, so I hope everyone's appreciating my ability to ramble for an hour and Andrew's ability to sit and look at me for an hour, which is not easy to do. My wife will tell you she cannot stand looking at me for that long. But there are a lot of guys getting ready to make some decisions in the next couple weeks, and we already said that Justin Hill will make his announcements on July 3rd. As far as the Ohio State recruiting board goes, right now, a third running back does not seem likely in the near future. Jordan Davis, and I still expect, will commit somewhere soon, but it will not be Ohio State, as we already said. And DeCorian Moore is one of those ones that I would be shocked if it doesn't happen by the middle of July. Vernell Brown, probably the same thing. Phillip Bell's Ohio State USC, that's an end of August decision, so we know that there's a little bit of time there. We don't know where Dalen McCutcheon is with his process. Brody Lennon, the tight end from Gilmore Academy in Cleveland, we think he'll commit to Ohio State by the end of this week. David Sanders is mid-August for a decision. Other than that, Ohio State offensive line sort of up in the air, unfortunately, as we're heading out of the summer. Maxwell Roy, the decision date that I initially had heard after his Ohio State visit was sometime in early July. It feels like that's speeding up, and I don't know if that's speeding up because he is trying to jump the line and get ahead of Trajan Odom, which would make sense and what I would do if I was him. But Trajan Odom is very likely to commit somewhere like this week as well, so there's movement there. Malik Autry, again, he said something about, I'll make a decision next week. I don't think that's really going to happen one way or the other. Take a deep breath. I feel like I'm talking really fast.
No, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'm trying to cram it all in, but it's hard. Riley Pettijohn, linebacker, is top priority on the board. I think he'll be off the board by the middle of July as well. Nathaniel Owusu Boateng looks like it's more of a Michigan Notre Dame fight, even though he took a visit to Ohio State. I would put Ohio State on the outside looking in there because the priority is Pettijohn. At corner, I already talked about Dorian Brew making a decision. I think it'll happen within the next 72 hours. And at safety, Messiah DeWeaver, Messiah DeWeaver, if you recall, was a 2015 quarterback from Wayne High School down in the Dayton area. So that's cool. I actually saw him at a camp a few weeks ago.
Where'd he end up going?
I actually saw Blue Smith at Ohio State last week too.
Oh, wow.
He was there with, he was apparently helping the Wayne High School 7-on-7 team. So, and I saw BB Landers, another Wayne guy. It's like a party on, Wayne.
Party on.
So, Messiah Delhomme, who is, I think, the most likely option at safety for Ohio State right now to be the fourth, if they decide to move on a fourth, or if they're going to maybe wait till the transfer portal for a fourth, like they could do with the third at running back. I don't know.
Or wait to see if Trey McNutt visits in the fall, maybe. We keep coming back to that every week.
No, I don't.
I know.
Everyone else does. I'm trying to be as I don't think that's going to happen. I hope I'm wrong. But for the first time, we're seeing crystal balls for Oregon. Like I'm not going to be shocked if Trey McNutt, who has said all along he's going to commit in this season, makes a summertime decision and commits to Oregon, and then maybe he'll still visit Ohio State in the fall. I'm not saying that's outside of the realm of possibility, but like that's it. Maybe this is my fault. In America, you can tell me if I'm the cause of this. I have at times tried to diffuse recruitments and throw water on them in an attempt to not obfuscate the truth, but like in the Aaron Scott recruitment, for example, like Aaron had told me a good month ahead of time what he was doing. And I played into the idea that like, hey, this is not my decision. It's not my story to tell. He wants it to be kept off the books. He wants it secret. I'll play along. Promise you, I am not doing that when I say that I don't think Trey McNutt is going to Ohio State. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I hope I'm wrong. The Ohio State fan in me wants to be wrong. But I don't think that I'm wrong in that case.
Well, I'll make sure to ask you about it again next week.
So I'm sorry. And I know everyone wants me to be wrong, and I want to be wrong. But is it my fault, Andrew? Is it my fault?
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
It makes me feel bad because I know people think that I'm just playing along or that I'm trying to like, but I'm not. I promise. If I were, I would not say that I was, obviously. But so I guess I can understand where the confusion comes in.
Yeah, I can see it. But anyway, I think we talked about most of the big upcoming announcements. Sometime in August, sometime for David Sanders, but no date or anything like that. So
yeah, I would bet by mid-August it's done either way. What also seems to be done, and then we'll move into the 4-minute offense here. Ohio State's offered 12 quarterbacks in the class of 2026. 9 of them have now committed elsewhere, including I think 7 in the last like 6 days, which is insane. Including the latest Troy Hune committing to Penn State on a Tuesday morning. And I'm very disappointed in that because I had this whole storyline in my head that I was already creating for when Troy Hune ended up at Ohio State. I thought the Buckeyes maybe could get him to delay, and they tried. I know that they tried. I know they reached out on Monday once there was speculation that his recruitment was imminent. But bottom line is this. Ohio State has Julian Sayin and Tavian St. Clair lined up at quarterback, and people are not going to be interested in playing behind those. This class of 2025, similar to how the receivers are like the 2022 class, like this is going to be a 2023 type of recruiting class for Ohio State in the class of 2026. Okay, so just get familiar with some lesser known names. That class ended up being a Brock Glenn commitment in the summer. 6 months before signing day. So this would actually be next summer. So that's how long, that these commitments are coming early. And then Ohio State ended up flipping Lincoln Keenholz in November. So a month before signing day. So it's going to be a different type of cycle. Faison Brandon, the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country by most people's board, is probably going to come off the board here soon. I think Tennessee is the likely landing spot. So then there's 10 of them off the board of the 12 Ohio State's offered. That leaves Illinois' Jonas Williams and California's Brady Palmer as the 2 that are still out there. We'll see. I think, and I talked about this a little bit with Austin. It'll be on tomorrow's daily as we were talking about Tavian St. Clair in the Elite 11. Like Ohio State's wanted an in-state quarterback for a while, like someone that they felt could develop and stay in the program and wouldn't force their hand to play them right away and transfer and all that stuff. And they really thought in the class of 2025 that you had that with Ryan Montgomery and Tavian St. Clair. Like this is going to be we can develop these guys class. And then Tavian St. Clair shot up through the roof and is now like maybe going to be the number 1 player in the country. So, and Ryan Montgomery's committed to Georgia. So like things have changed considerably for those 2 and their futures. But I think that there's an opportunity in the class of 2026, maybe for Ohio State to reevaluate in the state of Ohio. And that means Nathan Bernard is someone who I would pay attention to at Ashland. Ohio State's seen him a number of times. He's a 4-star quarterback. I mean, he's ranked fairly highly. And I think, he's a 247 sports composite. He's a 4-star. He's a player that has a lot of development to do to be that guy. And I think that he's interesting. There's Levi Davis at Olentangy, who people love, and a freaky athlete. Kind of small, though, has not grown since his freshman year. And I don't know that I'm struggling to see Ohio State making a move on a quarterback under 6 foot tall. Like I just, no matter how much they like his other traits, size is not something, size is not a skill, but it is still something that you are looking for when you're at Ohio State. And I'm just going to say it now because I've been thinking about it, even though he really struggled at the end of the 7-on-7 tournament at Ohio Stadium last week with Pickerington North. Jaron Mock, who's the quarterback for the Pickerington North Panthers, he's a 6'3", 200-pound kid. He's originally from Reynoldsburg. Like, he's got 5 early offers, including Wisconsin. I really think Jaron Mock has like all the traits you're looking for. And if you are going to take what could be a developmental quarterback in class of 2026, and it could be a kid from Ohio, a kid from Pick North, like, I actually think that he's a player that I personally would spend a little bit more time investigating if I was Ohio State. They don't listen to me, so don't think that this is me telling you that this is happening. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, that's just a guy I would go after. It's just going to be a much harder class to recruit a quarterback than maybe initially thought. Yeah,
no, I can get behind that idea completely. Take a more of a developmental in-state guy for 2026. And then in 2027, I mean, you got Brady Edmonds out in California, who seems to have genuine interest. And I think you said he could be like one of the top few players in the country when those initial rankings come out. So if that's the trajectory and that's what Ryan Day has to do, then I can get behind that.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Again, there'll be more in depth about this on the daily on Wednesday, but we're seeing Brian Hartline with the offer to Bob Penn Miller. We're seeing Ryan Day with the offer to Preston Bowman. Like, there is a adjustment happening in the way Ohio State's recruiting some of these positions. And Ryan Day's philosophy has always been recruit the best quarterback in the country, no matter what, every single cycle, and then let the chips fall where they may. Where Lincoln Riley, for example, has been like one big, one small, one big, one small. And I think that you maybe need to consider that if you're Ohio State, knowing where things are going and with the transfer portal and everything else.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense to me. So,
which is unfortunate, though, because when you're trying to build a recruiting class, like if you have a player like Chris Henry as the number 1 player in the country and the number 1 receiver, he's going to want to know who his quarterback is. And so, like, that's something where, Ohio State may hold off on and getting local because they're still looking for that national guy, because it does matter for the rest of the class. But again, Jaron Mock to me is interesting. Like, I'm very intrigued by his athletic traits, size, skill, speed, like the arm strength. Obviously, he's a high school sophomore, so he needs to get better at reading defenses and making the next level throws. But there's a lot to like in his game, just from a purely trait driven standpoint. So that's where I am with that. 4-minute offense, Andrew. Moving on.
Yeah, we're over an hour. So just 2 quick things, 2 in or outs. One's going to be a quick one because we've already talked about him a lot. But would you have, like we said, within the next couple of days, expecting Dorian Brew to make a decision as we sit here now, Tuesday evening?
Why would you do this? I said to you, it's a 3-team race. It's a toss-up. I don't know. I think he wants to go to Ohio State. Does the head or heart or wallet matter the most? I still think the heart matters the most. So I guess I'm going to say I think he's in, but I am not at all confident. That is a strictly knowing how close he was to committing to Ohio State before. Like, I think that the Buckeyes and Tim Walton have a great plan for him, and I think that he will pick Ohio State, but I am 1,000% not going to be shocked if he ends up at USC or Texas.
Got it. We have talked a lot about Riley Pettijohn, and every time his name has gotten brought up, and you've kind of given some optimistic takes on that. I've kind of ignored it when you've done that.
Shocker.
I know it's just the pessimist in me. But now seeing some reports coming out of the Texas side and the Texas A&M side, where he visited this past weekend, and with him coming in, entering decision mode and possibly announcing here in the next few weeks, it seems like there's actually some buzz growing that Ohio State could be the pick. What is your take on that, and what would be your stance in or out on that one right now?
I would have him in. My take is Ohio State knows who they're up against here, and they're up against Texas A&M and USC and Texas, and those. I would, in my reading of this recruitment right now, I would have Ohio State 1, Texas A&M 2, USC 3, and Texas 4. That's how I would have it. But that being the case, and me not being important in the big picture of any recruit's decision-making process, I think Ohio State needs to understand the importance / value of recruiting and landing a commitment from the top-ranked linebacker in the country from Texas. Like, that's pretty good. Ohio State is not afraid to play in the NIL playground, but they are not a program that wants to just be involved in the weeds for everyone. I don't think he's a everyone type of player. I think he is a next level type of player and a must get guy. And when you're up against USC and A&M and Texas, that means that Ohio State's going to have to be more aggressive than maybe they would like to be when it comes to NIL play for a linebacker. I think you've got a couple weeks to figure it out. But I think if they, I said it earlier about like, if all things are equal, right? And all things are not equal if there's a significant gap in the NIL opportunity. So the Buckeyes need to find a way to close that gap and make sure that they are competitive and putting themselves in. But if it's far as relationship, the scheme, the program, etc., Ohio State should be considered the team to beat in my mind. And I've been saying that for a while, at least trying to hint at it for a while. So nothing has changed in that respect. James Laurinaitis very badly wants him. He is the perfect complement to TJ Alford and Eli Lee. And it would be a really, really darn good 3-man linebacker class for Ohio State, which they desperately need because the linebacker position after this year, and especially after the next 2 years, when you have CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles and Cody Simon and all those guys gone, like things are going to get a little bit weird, and you need to have dudes. And Riley Pettijohn is a dude. Like he's an NFL player, and you need NFL players at linebacker. So yeah, I think Ohio State knows that, and I think that they'll make sure that they get it done.
Yeah, I'm watching that one much more closely now than I have been for the last month when you've repeatedly brought his name up. So props to you on that one.
Well, I mean, there's no props until it happens. But I said last week, I don't understand why people are completely ignoring Ohio State as though the program is a community college. Like it's bizarre to me. I don't get it, and it really only comes from the Texas side. I haven't seen other schools be that dismissive of Ohio State, but like maybe, I mean, Steve Sarkisian must think Ohio State is just a pissant because he is clearly not mentioning, his staff is clearly not worried about Ohio State in any way, shape, or form for any recruit, which I don't understand considering the best player in the state of Texas is committed to Ohio State.
Yeah, it's quite weird.
But whatever. There's a lot of stuff that we talked about today on Talking Stuff. We appreciate it. I don't know what we're going to do in the next week. Obviously we got the 4th of July coming up middle of next week. Well, if things happen, if there's important news that needs to be broken down and dissected in a more contextualized manner, we'll get together and put a Talking Stuff together early next week or middle of next week. But I think more likely is probably just some commitment analysis type things over the next couple of weeks, because really the recruiting stuff is done. The conversations are pretty much finished until we get through this next dead period, and Ohio State is just waiting on a lot of answers. They have the number 1 ranked class in the country, 19 commitments, pretty productive June, and a very important couple weeks ahead. But Andrew Ellis and myself, Jeremy Birmingham, will continue to talk stuff about that here on the podcast. And we appreciate you watching. We appreciate you listening. If you're doing this on just the podcast platforms, please rate us on YouTube. Don't rate us on YouTube. Rate us on the podcast platforms. Leave a review on the podcast platforms. Subscribe on YouTube and the podcast platforms. Turn on your notifications on YouTube. Anything else that you have to do?
Don't think so.
No, I mean, we appreciate you. That's the bottom line. And we know that I can be hard to listen to and extremely hard to look at. So again, thank you for doing that. Andrew, congratulations on your house closing. Next time we talk, maybe you'll be in a different backdrop, the one that looks a little less, that 70s show.
Yeah, we'll see.
See you later, Eric Foreman. Goodbye.